Opening, cold open, plus quick setup. I stood on a narrow catwalk while fuselages slid beneath me like freight cars, green skins glinting under sodium lamps. The floor trembled. Rivet guns chattered in a hard staccato. A foreman waved his arm. Nobody looked up. The line didn't slow. I counted. One hull, then another, then another. Each minute here erased a week of our losses at home. I was a captured Luftwaffe NCO, shipped inland from France, still arguing that precision and miracle weapons would save us. Then I saw the Americans had put airplanes on a conveyor, and the argument died in my throat. Section 1, Capture, Transit, and Belief. Late 1944, we were pulled out of a hedgerow by infantry who were tired and efficient. Hands up, mouths shut, boots squelching in cold mud. They marched us to a railhead, the kind with more sidings than our entire district. We were loaded into guarded cars, aircrew, mechanics, one Obergefreiter with a broken wrist, and the doors slid shut on the argument we'd been carrying for months. We debated Wunderwaffe because it was all we had. A lieutenant swore the jets would reverse the tide as soon as fuel arrived and butterflies grew into bullets. Another man, quiet, wire spectacles, said fuel wouldn't arrive because trains warehoused in forests don't deliver miracles. I reasoned the handwork gave us an edge. A master fitter fills a spar, files a hair here, adjusts a shim there. Mass production, we said with pride, built sloppy things quickly. Reality said otherwise. We'd been stripping intact airframes to keep two flying. Dispersed shops hid under trees, ran when the sirens stopped, and measured parts with eyes because gauges had walked off or been melted down. Bomb damage cut the roads into gravel. A magneto might take a week to chase, and then the line chief would find it wouldn't seat because the pattern had drifted. Our crews became scavengers, going aircraft to aircraft like starving men working a carcass down to bone. The train crossed the Midwest and taught me a new word: depth. Rails that didn't end, grain silos like battalions, refineries humming at night, bridges intact, then more bridges, as if the continent was an uncomplicated machine designed to move weight. Men in the car stopped talking when we saw the yards. Strings of tank cars so long, the caboose was an idea, not a sight. Rumors worked through the POW grapevine. Some were sent to farms, harvesting and sorting, some to factories. Menial tasks, they said, with casual discipline because nobody expected us to run. Then the assignment came: day labor at a plant near the river. Cap confiscated, an armband issued. A guard gave rules as if he'd done it for months. No touching machinery, stay in your lane, meals at posted times. The first morning, we filed into a cafeteria where the line of workers was longer than our entire squadron had been after replacements. Women in coveralls, older men with hands like bark, boys with crew cuts and pencils behind their ears. I kept my chin up out of old habit, pride in craft under my tongue like a bitter lozenge. Mass production, I told myself, turns out crude copies. Our way, even under bombs, still produced aircraft that flew straight and fought well. Then the doors opened, and the noise hit like artillery. Not the blast, but the sustained, precise violence of tools biting metal without pause. Section 2, the line that beats us. They sent us up to a mezzanine, a catwalk above the main artery. Below, the line snaked in a clean geometry, conveyor sections marked with stripes, jigs like iron frames, gantries carrying sub-assemblies that hung like ribs from an animal being assembled mid-stride. Overhead, hoists moved engine mounts in lazy arcs that never collided. There was no waiting. Fuselage shells advanced, rails whispering, and at each station, fixtures locked with a dull clack. Teams swarmed, tools were preset. No one searched for anything. The rhythm had a name here, tact, and it wasn't romantic. Colored lights pulsed. When amber flashed, a supervisor materialized, cleared a bottleneck, and vanished in seconds. No raised voices, no drama. Work resumed on a breath. I watched parallel lines working their own cadence. Wings on one track, engines on another. A forest of propeller hubs like barrels in a cooperage, all converging at a marriage station that looked ceremonial, only because it was so precise. Inventory didn't sit, it flowed. Crates were labeled by hour, not day. A man in a cap flipped tags from 10:15 to 10:30, as if time itself was a consumable. Parts bins were restocked mid-shift, without stopping the line. It was like observing a regiment move through a crossroads without halting, while the staff officers wrote orders at a run and still kept the map clean. Shifts were staggered, whistles sounded, but the river never stopped. Replacement crews slotted in like reserves into a trench segment. Same posture, same rhythm, hands finding handles in the dark. Women ran rivet guns, two-handed, forearms tense, bodies braced against the recoil. Men at torque wrenches watched dials. Inspectors carried gauges. If a hole was off, the fuselage didn't wait for a hero. It peeled off to a rework bay behind glass, where the noise changed pitch, and the stream went on. A sign over a foreman's station wrote the rule, with American bluntness. No custom work on the line. I felt the insult and the genius. Our best men had saved airframes with custom work. Here, the saving grace was never to need it. Jigs made alignment inevitable. If the fixture was right, the part was right. The certainty would have made our fitters weep from relief or frustration. We had filed spars by hand under lantern light while the power cut. We'd held bolts between our teeth because the bin was empty. We'd watched a siren push 1,000 men into shelters while clamps cooled and lost their bite. Here, electricity was steady. The hum didn't vary. Parts were standardized. Serial numbers were stamped clean, in rows that spoke of machines that didn't get tired or drunk or blown sideways by a blast. Paperwork moved as fast as metal. Clipboards and cards flowing along a separate belt that kept sense matched to steel. A worker dropped a Clico, the small temporary fastener we all knew too well, and before it hit the floor, another hand swapped in a full tray. Nobody looked down. They worked it like a drill team, where the rifles never stopped moving, and behind them, a rail spur ran right into the plant. Tank cars feeding fuel and solvents through pipes we couldn't see. Outbound flats idling with chains slack, diesel breath hanging in the air. In sealed rooms, I felt through the walls. Engines ran on dynos. The thrum was a different animal. A window showed an operator logging readouts, while a flame licked a stack and vanished. Failures weren't curses carried into the next month. They were data corrected that hour. New hires shadowed at one station, then graduated. Manuals were plain drawings at eye level, not locked in a desk or floating in rumor. Security was present, but minimal. A guard watched us, more out of habit than alarm. Confidence ran the place. They weren't afraid of us, because in truth, they were ahead of us. I did arithmetic on the rail in front of me, one fuselage length every few minutes. I counted the pulse of amber, the green, the swerve into marriage. Even at half pace, the numbers ran away from me. dozens by sundown, felt modest. At full tilt, 100 a day wasn't a boast. It was a flaw. I felt the internal snap then. A clean fracture where strategy lives. Every plane we burned would be replaced before our next briefing. Our attrition game collapsed. The consolation of killing one more bomber lost its substance if the river of metal below me wouldn't dry up. But accepting the math took one more day on that catwalk. The first day showed me motion and certainty. The second would show me counting, made official, written in chalk, like a barrage timetable, and met without ceremony. I went back to the barracks that night with the noise in my skull and the simple, humiliating thought that courage had been demoted to a supporting role. Section 3, the day the numbers landed. Second shift, they handed us brooms and sent us back up to the mezzanine. We were told to keep the walkway clear of metal shavings and dropped fasteners. I drifted toward the dispatch board because the chalk looked like a map of intent. It listed rollouts, rework slots, engine swaps, and the hour blocks they'd occupy. 96 units planned, 4 tagged for rework, 3 for engine changes, no flourish, just neat script, times in quarter hours. Outside the high windows, truck convoys idled in lanes, nose to tail. A dispatcher stood at a podium that fed into the loading doors. He stamped forms every minute, the rhythm as steady as a metronome. I looked for a backlog, a jam, a sign that the machine would choke. There wasn't one. A veteran worker leaned against the railing during a break and asked if I'd come from the coast. I told him France. He nodded at the board and said they'd hit triple digits last week. He said it like bread, not triumph. He had a wedding band, polished thin and grease living under his nails. He mentioned parts moving from 3 states and laughed lightly when I asked what happened if one plant hiccuped. 2 others filled the gap by tomorrow, he said. He wasn't boasting, he was describing gravity. The conveyor paused for the first time I'd seen that day. A red light blinked. A jig pin stuck. A tool cart rolled in before anyone raised a voice. 20 seconds of focused hands, a tap, a wipe, a fresh pin, and the light went green. A manager with a clipboard walked the line and wrote down the cycle time blip. He didn't scold. He added a floating team for the hour. The pace stabilized as if a drummer had settled the band. Lunch came like a tide. Half the crew stepped away and a relief crew stepped in. Same bodies, different faces, motions identical. No learning curve, no lost rhythm. It reminded me of a gun team, changing barrels mid-belt. Hot steel out, cool steel in, rate of fire unchanged. I ran the numbers from what I could see. 1 fuselage every 14 or 15 minutes. An 8-hour day puts you into the mid-90s. Add the night shift and whatever the morning had banked, and you crossed 100 without ceremony. My head saw the old arguments, jets, rockets, last stands, and then saw fuel burned like tap water in test runs that treated flight as routine verification, not a luxury. Back home, pilots hoarded kerosene for circuits. Here, test pilots taxied to the runway as if they were borrowing a bicycle. While I counted, letters from home passed through the barracks, coal shortages, frozen points on rail lines, boys issued boots that chewed through in a month. We'd kept 1 airfield supplied by bleeding units, white on the roads. In this place, 10 fields could be fed by habit while the lines sang. I stopped arguing. When a man in our hut asked if jets would save us, I told him only if they came on a belt like cartridges. A few of us grew quiet. One of the night fighter boys cried into his blanket and didn't hide it. A guard saw our faces and offered cigarettes without a word. Pity sits heavier than scorn in a man's stomach. In the long run, when I mark the end, I write that catwalk date, not a battle, not a surrender ceremony, but chalk on a board and a conveyor that didn't care who watched. Section 4. Fact check and industrial context. To anchor what I saw, understand the archetype, wartime American aircraft plants used moving assembly and overhead conveyors with standardized jigs to force alignment. Quality lived in fixtures, not in heroic fitters. Tact, fixed cycle timing, kept stations honest. Bottlenecks were cleared fast and rework moved offline, so throughput didn't stall. Documented output supports the scale. At Ford's Willow Run, B-24 Liberator production accelerated to roughly 1 per hour at peak conditions across shifts, with daily rollouts reaching into the dozens. Boeing's Seattle complexes and Douglas plants coordinated sub-assemblies by rail and barge, feeding final lines at sustained rates. 2- and 3-shift operations were common, with staggered breaks so the conveyor never fully stopped. Supply depth mattered. Regional networks fed wings, engines, instruments, and wiring looms on schedules measured in hours. Rail spurs ran into the plants. Tank cars delivered solvents and fuel. Outbound flats waited under cranes. This was an American version of just-in-time before the term existed, enforced by boards, tags, and dispatchers. On the German side in late war, dispersed production fought against bombing with workshops in woods and tunnels, but paid in quality variation and lost efficiency. Skilled labor thinned. Fuel scarcity crippled training and test cycles. Armament Ministry memos and Allied bombing surveys record this erosion. 100 a day reads as credible at aggregate peak. Across lines and shifts for certain models and periods, naming exact figures needs attribution. Use War Production Board reports, Ford Company records, AAF Statistical Digest, and Spear-era memoranda for precise citations. The feeling remains the point. The numbers, however, bear it out. Conclusion, resolution, and meaning. The war ended for me on a catwalk, not a ridgeline. The conveyor taught strategy in minutes per fuselage more clearly than any staff map. Courage can take a bridge, but capacity sustains a continent. If you want ground-level truth behind grand strategy, subscribe now. Watch our companion's story on fuel in the Ardennes to see how numbers turn into outcomes. New first-person histories every week. Stay with us for the next account.